Welcome to the Deep Dive Books channel, where we hope you find something valuable every day.
Recently, the Middle East conflict has intensified, particularly with the growing tensions between Israel and Iran. Many worry it could escalate into a global war. Let's explore how to understand this situation. This is no mystery. Anyone familiar with geopolitics knows the underlying dynamics. However, relying solely on biased or fragmented news without analyzing the core logic can be confusing. I've compiled and organized information from various sources to provide a clearer perspective. On January 3, 2020, the U.S. used a drone strike at Baghdad airport to eliminate Qasem Soleimani, commander of Iran's Quds force. In retaliation, Iran attacked U.S. bases in Iraq on January 8. Fast forward to April 1, 2024, Israel bombed the Iranian embassy in Syria, killing 16 people, including a Quds force commander. Iran responded with airstrikes on April 13. On April 19, Israel retaliated with strikes on Iran. On July 31, Hamas political leader was assassinated by Israeli agents in Tehran, and a Hezbollah commander died in a Lebanese airstrike the same day. Iran vowed revenge. Before Iran could act, on September 17 and 18, Israel detonated thousands of pagers remotely in Lebanon and Syria, causing heavy casualties among Hezbollah leaders. Between September 23 and 27, Israel carried out airstrikes in Lebanon, wiping out Hezbollah's top leadership. On October 1, Iran retaliated by launching hundreds of missiles at Israel. There are many details we can't cover here, but Iran's pattern of retaliation is noteworthy. Every attack was an airstrike, most were intercepted, and the casualties inflicted on Israel and the U.S. were minimal. This is because Iran notified the U.S. before each strike, essentially giving Israel a heads-up. Iran clearly doesn't want the conflict to escalate. In fact, after the October 1 airstrike, Iran publicly stated, "We've retaliated. If Israel dares to respond, we'll strike back again." The subtext: Iran wants this round to end here. Since Iran is unwilling to escalate the situation now, why did it stir up so much trouble before? Iran has been the sponsor behind groups like Palestine's Hamas, Lebanon's Hezbollah, Yemen's Houthi forces, and some guerrilla-style militias in Syria. As a professor noted back in 2020, the central conflict in the Middle East is no longer Israel, but Iran. What is Iran's logic in this? I have an explanation for your reference. Modernization is an inevitable historical process, but it is also a prolonged journey that encounters significant resistance along the way. The greatest obstacle comes from identity politics. Modernization is not just about science and technology. It also encompasses human rights, market economies, universal education, social welfare, democratic governance, multiculturalism, and sustainable environmental development. It is a comprehensive system. Without a market economy, there would be no dazzling technological innovation because it wouldn't be worth pursuing. Without freedom of thought, there would be no cultural prosperity. Without women's liberation, there would be neither high-level education nor a developed economy because half of the workforce would be missing. To embrace modernization means to embrace all aspects of it. Some label modernization's values as Western concepts, implying they are unappealing. To them, I would ask, which value do you oppose? Do you oppose women's liberation, equality for all, or the idea that people in your country deserve freedom of thought? That said, it is true that modernization originated in the West, and this does make some people uncomfortable. For instance, ordinary people in the Middle East, rooted in religious traditions, often feel their sense of honor is threatened. They say, "We don't want Western values. We want to preserve our own identity." Cultural discomfort, in itself, is not a big issue. Today, when we promote pride in Chinese culture, it often involves wearing traditional Hanfu or practicing calligraphy. No one is advocating a return to foot binding, queue hairstyles, or kneeling ceremonies. Some scholars search for the roots of modernization in Chinese classics with a fine-tooth comb, but this is merely to provide emotional comfort. Good ideas are good ideas. It doesn't matter who invented them first. However, some interest groups, such as those in Iran, exploit identity politics to resist modernization. This is the essence of identity politics. The primary contradiction in today's world lies between modernization and identity politics. In 1963, Iran's Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi initiated a series of social, economic, and cultural reforms, including land reform, state enterprise restructuring, expanded voting rights for women, infrastructure development, and educational reform. All geared toward modernization. For Iran, this meant secularization and westernization. By the 1970s, Iranian urban women were dressed in fashionable, highly westernized attire with no trace of Islamic influence. Living in that era, one might have thought modernization was unstoppable. But for many Iranians, it turned out to be nothing more than a fleeting dream. The problem was that the winds of modernization did not immediately benefit everyone. The primary beneficiaries of Pahlavi's reforms were the urban middle class. Rural populations, largely excluded, felt disconnected from the changes, while religious leaders, sidelined from power, were deeply dissatisfied. These groups united in protest, culminating in the Islamic Revolution of 1979. The Shah fled into exile, and under Ayatollah Khamenei's leadership, Iran became a theocratic state. Khomeini, and later his successor Ayatollah Khamenei, pursued policies of extreme rigidity. Western culture was entirely banned, and Islamic law was strictly enforced, including mandatory hijab wearing for women in public. As recently as 2022, a young woman named Mahsa Amini was arrested by Iran's morality police for improperly wearing her hijab. She was beaten to death in custody. It wasn't until September 2024 that Iran's newly elected president, whose powers remain limited, with supreme authority resting with Khamenei, announced that morality police would no longer forcibly impose hijab rules on women. Does this mean modernization is unsuited for Iran? Over 40 years have passed, and Iran has seemingly resisted modernization. How has Khamenei's regime managed to achieve this? Even if modernization would bring immense benefits to Iran, Khamenei's regime must reject it because their theocratic foundation is incompatible with reform. Any genuine reform would inevitably threaten their rule. Yet, in today's interconnected world, isolation is impossible. Modern states must engage in trade, adopt new technologies, facilitate people-to-people exchanges, and allow limited cultural interactions. This exposes the populace to modernization, fostering dissatisfaction with the regime. The challenge for regimes resisting modernization is finding a way to enjoy its benefits without adopting its structures. This creates a paradoxical stance, but under certain conditions, the contradiction can be managed. Two key conditions are required. First, you must have a non-modernized means of generating wealth. If you can't generate wealth, you have no choice but to accept modernization. But for some Middle Eastern countries, generating wealth is straightforward. Sell oil. Oil resources belong to the state, or even directly to the royal family or oligarchs. There's no need for a modern economy. With oil comes money, and with money comes stability. A Qatari citizen doesn't need to start a business or acquire modern technological skills. The state provides welfare directly. What more could they ask for but gratitude? Alternatively, some smaller nations may lack natural resources to sell but can serve as enforcers for major powers on the international stage, earning economic aid. This works too. As long as the government's revenue isn't directly derived from taxes paid by the people, it can assert dominance. The government sustains you, not the other way around. What right do you have to challenge it or demand reforms? Unless you develop a modernized consciousness and realize that, fundamentally, it's the people who sustain the government. That brings us to the second condition. Suppress modernized thought with a stronger ideology. The most convenient tool for this is identity politics. Iranians must take pride in Iran's religious and cultural traditions, rejecting Western influences as corrosive to their society. The public already harbors some populist sentiments, making this a mutually reinforcing dynamic. Iran fulfills both conditions, allowing the Khamenei regime to endure. However, this longevity comes with hidden risks. Authoritarian regimes depend on populism, and as Yuval Noah Harari observes in Homo Deus, populism thrives on displays of strength. To maintain domestic respect, such regimes must project power externally. This explains why authoritarian states often exhibit aggressive foreign policies. For rational autocrats, mere displays of strength suffice. Actual confrontation is unnecessary. However, Iran's situation is more complex. As a Shia-majority nation surrounded by Sunni-majority states, religious honor compels it to challenge not only Israel but also neighboring countries. Populism is a double-edged sword that's difficult to wield effectively. Iran cannot afford widespread conflict, particularly as domestic unrest persists, with frequent protests rooted in the shadow of the Islamic Revolution. Iran's actual military capabilities may be limited. Domestic uprisings might reveal its inability to quell internal dissent, let alone sustain external campaigns. As the Arab historian Ibn Khaldun noted, empires' capacity for violence naturally declines over time, forcing them to rely on border tribes or proxies for enforcement. Khamenei cannot risk the fallout of a formal military defeat. Instead, he invests in proxy forces, such as Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthi militia, engaging in small-scale proxy wars. Proxy wars offer several advantages. Iran maintains control over outcomes. Success is credited to Iranian leadership, while failure is attributed to the proxies themselves. Proxy forces provide Iran with bargaining chips. Whether negotiating with Israel or the US, Iran positions itself as essential for regional stability. Proxy wars are cost-effective. Fighters from impoverished regions, motivated by radical ideologies and religious fervor, are willing to die for the cause. High-ranking leaders in groups like Hamas and Hezbollah receive millions in funding from Iran. A fraction of the cost of waging a modern war. In essence, Iran's export of violence sustains Khamenei's domestic authority. It's a delicate balance, but one broadly accepted. Israel once believed that providing Palestinians with economic opportunities would foster peace. Similarly, as a professor noted, the US and China share a common interest in Middle Eastern stability. As long as oil flows, they are content to leave Iran alone. China refrains from exporting revolution, while the US, scarred by failed interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan, is unwilling to escalate conflict. Sanctions remain the US's toughest measure against Iran. However, this fragile equilibrium is prone to collapse. Khamenei may look back with regret on two key developments. 1. Hamas's excessively brutal attacks on Israel, which provided Israel with justification for a comprehensive military response, pushing the situation beyond control. 2. The advent of decapitation strikes by the US and Israel, employing advanced technology to eliminate the leadership of militant groups. These strikes make it impossible for Iran to ignore proxy losses. If Iran fails to retaliate, it risks losing its proxy's loyalty. Yet retaliation risks direct confrontation with Israel. A scenario Iran cannot afford. This explains Iran's calculated, performative responses. Pre-announced missile strikes targeting military installations, designed to minimize casualties, followed by declarations of cessation. Should Israel choose to de-escalate, this chapter might close, allowing Khamenei to devise new strategies to showcase Iran's strength. However, this time, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu seems unwilling to relent. Before Iran's October 1 retaliation, he addressed the Iranian people directly, emphasizing that Jews and Persians could coexist peacefully, targeting only the regime. Khamenei's decades of meticulous maneuvering have left him in a position where Netanyahu holds the initiative. Contrary to some perceptions, modernization is a force inherently aligned with political stability. The era of colonial conquest and gunboat diplomacy is long past. Modernization thrives on free trade, which benefits all parties involved and requires a stable political environment to flourish. In contrast, ideologies resisting modernization are inherently unstable. A key reason they are ultimately destined to lose. Due to U.S. sanctions, Iran has a relatively low presence on the international stage. Yet, despite this, Iranian cinema has won 2 Oscars in the 21st century, and Iran contributes over 50,000 scientific papers annually. When I used to work in physics, I met Iranian scientists who were incredibly brilliant. Netanyahu wasn't wrong. Iranians are remarkable people. They deserve modernization. That's it for today's content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
If you feel there is value in this, please like, subscribe to this channel, and leave your thoughts or suggestions in the comments section. Let's grow together and read more good books.